When you think of big English carp, straight away you think of places like Oxfordshire, the Reading Pits and the Colne Valley. You definitely don't think of Cornwall. Cornwall is somewhere that you go on holiday with the family. It's definitely not somewhere you go carp fishing. But early this year, around about January time, I got invited to go and fish on a water known as Spooky Pool, which is in deepest, darkest Cornwall. Not too far from Truro. The exact location is kept a little bit hush-hush just to keep the lake a little bit sort of quiet. It's invite only really, but it is an exclusive lake, so it's only a small lake which contains some absolutely fantastic fish. Now this particular water I've known about for probably about 15 years or so when it first started appearing in Carp Talk, because when I used to work at Carp Talk, any carp from the southwest which were over 30 pounds were big fish, because let's be honest, the southwest it's not got many big fish. Very few lakes have done 40 pounders and there's only one lake that's done 50 pounders, and that's Spooky Pool. Bit of a strange name. It's owned by a guy called Jack Basile, and Jack contacted me earlier this year and said, do you fancy coming and having a crack at the place? It's a little bit tricky, and last year it had only done, I think it was 24 carp captures throughout the whole entire year. So I knew it was going to be a little bit tricky, but with it being only 1 acre in size as well, I mean having the lake to myself, the third week in April sounded like a really good time to be on the lake, because let's be honest, it's that time of the year when the fish are a little bit more obliging. Some people term it clubbing season, and I knew that the lake had been fishing a little bit, well, up and down prior to me getting there, but the conditions looked really good for a 5-day session, which ended up being a 7-day session. And what I'm going to do now is talk to you about how that particular session went. Now it started on a Monday, and it took me a long while to get down there, probably about 6.5 hours in total, because obviously I live in Yorkshire. Bit of a long trek down there. The weather was nice and warm. It was raining up in Yorkshire, so I went through a lot of rain to get there, but when I got into Cornwall and Devon, the clouds opened and you got the blue skies, and when I arrived at the lake itself, it was absolutely glorious. It was about 5 or 6 degrees warmer than it was back home, and what I saw before me was a really nice intimate pool. Really small, probably somewhere that a lot of people would term as a back garden pond or a swimming pool. It's only about 1 acre in size, but having fished small waters quite a bit over the years, places like Spitfire Pool, Redmere Pool and several other waters, I really enjoy fishing small waters because it's really tricky fishing. As soon as you get out of the car and walk through the gate, the carp know you're there. And for me, the best thing about this was I was on the lake by myself. It is only a venue with 2 swims on it, but you can actually fish all the way around it. And the way that Jack runs it is, it's invite only, and there's only 2 anglers allowed on the water at any one time. But with me being there just on my own, it sounded absolutely perfect, because I could creep around, drop a rod in nice and close in spots where I thought I might see the carp. But when I arrived, first thing I wanted to do was walk around it and see if I could see any fish. I knew that the lake had been quiet for, I think it was about 3 days before I got there. There'd been nobody on the water. The guy who'd been there before me, I think he'd lost 1 fish, so that sounded quite promising. But when I walked up the bank, through the gate, onto the lake, I did automatically think, this is small, but it was nice. Set out in the middle of nowhere, countryside all around me, nice and quiet, and I walked down to the bottom end and I saw all the weed beds, and straight away I started seeing some really nice big carp amongst the weed, because this particular venue, by chance, it's not been set up as a spooky venue with ghost carp in it. It was named Spooky Pool by Jack's kids because of the trees that's around the lake. But in the lake itself, there are some really big ghost carp, 2 in particular, which have grown from 30 pounds in this lake up to over 50 pounds. They've got a real good track record as well, these carp. They've been in various other waters in the Cornish area. I think they came from a match pond about 20 years ago. Then they went onto a farm where they ended up staying for quite a few years before Jack lost the lease on the lake. And at that time there was 20 pounders, and then he put them into Spooky, which he originally set up as a bit of a stock pond because it's that small. But when he decided to fish it, having seen them, he caught one of them at a really big weight, and that's when he decided to open it up. And over the years, they've slowly and steadily put weight on. And the 2 big ghosties in there, both of which are sort of side by side, ounces apart really. There's 1 fish in there that's called the Big Girl, which is the big one. That's the one that's historically been the biggest fish in the lake, but over the last sort of 5 or 6 years, the other ghost carp in there that's similar sort of size has caught it up. And at the time of me arriving there, both of them weighed over 50 pounds, which are absolutely huge carp anywhere in England, but for Cornwall, they're obviously both giant carp. Now straight away when I walked on the venue, the first things that I saw were the Ghost Carp. I think there are 4 ghosties in total, and in total there's only 18 fish in the lake. 4 ghosties, the 2 50-pounders, another one of which is 38 pounds, and another one which is 31 pound. But you've got 18 carp to go at, so I knew it was going to be a really tricky week's fishing over there, because 1 bite during a week, most weeks is pretty good going on this venue. But with me being on there on my own, and with the conditions looking promising, I did think I got a really good chance of maybe getting 1 or 2 fish in my session. And in all honesty, when I drove all the way down there, all I wanted to do was get a bite. And as soon as I walked round, having seen these carp in the margins, loads of them coming really in close, I thought, wow, I've got a really good chance of catching something here. It can't be that easy. And I literally just got a rod, put a hook on it, bit of bread, and dropped it in front of the first fish that I saw. And lo and behold, it took it straight away, and I hooked it, and unfortunately it came off. It wasn't one of the big uns, but when you arrive at a venue having driven 6 or 7 hours, all you want is a carp. So as soon as I lost that carp, I thought, oh no, that's probably mucked up my session. So I then decided to sit down, get myself set up, get myself in order, walk the dog around the pond, decide what I was going to do. Originally I thought about maybe setting up my camp just outside the gate, but in the end I set it up just inside the gate, because there was a shed just inside the gate and a few sort of bigger trees which looked the ideal place for me to hide away. And then all I decided to do was just plop my rods in nice and close. I wasn't going to do any casting, I wasn't going to do any disturbance or any feature finding. It didn't really need it. Jack had already told me that there weren't many features on the lake other than a little gravelly area in the middle part of the lake. Most of the fish tended to come really close in, either on the left-hand bank or on the right-hand bank. But just in front of me, I got 3 rods out, pretty close in. Really wasn't thinking anything more about getting any bites, especially during the hours of darkness, because if you look through the Facebook page, you can see that most of the carp tend to get caught in the day. There's very few captures on this lake at night, and it'd already gone dark. And I'd settled down, get myself a coffee, and I think it was about 8 o'clock in the evening when I was contemplating going to bed, and lo and behold, my left-hand rod let out a couple of bleeps, and then it was away. And then what happened for about the next 10 minutes was one really colossal fight where the fish stripped 10 or 15 yards of line off me. Time after time, I'd gain 15 yards, it'd take 15 yards back. Didn't want to put my headlamp on because it's that quieter water where I wanted to try and keep as much of the disturbance away as possible. But in the end, I turned on my headlamp because the fish got into a reed bed and I need to get in the water to get it out of there. And lo and behold, straight in front of me was one of the big ghosties. Couldn't believe it, because with there only being 4 of them in there, all of which are over 30 pounds. With that fish just in front of me, it was close to getting netted. I thought, I can't believe this, on my first day, I've gone and lost a fish and maybe got one of the decent sized ghosties in my net. And a few minutes later, I ended up with a fish in the net. It turned out to be the smallest ghostie in the lake at 31.5 pounds. So let's have a quick look at the footage of that fish. We've just had this one. Not weighed it properly yet. It's 35 with the sling. So it's going to be about 30, 31. But that's a lovely carp. What a lovely fish to catch from Cornwall. Really, really nice. Just wanted to catch 1 carp from this trip, so to get one on my first day, and it's a 30 pounder. Yeah, proper happy. During the night it was silent, and that first night after landing that small ghostie, should we call it, 31 pounds, I had a lovely night's sleep. I needed it as well after the drive. And then the next morning I got up, there was nothing to show in the morning, and I got up, had a little wander around the lake, keeping things nice and quiet, and luckily the dog was not feeling herself, so she wasn't really following me around too much, so I could creep around and see if I could see any fish. And when the sun came up in the morning, it beats down towards the, should we call it, the shallower end of the lake where the weed is, and I started to see a few shapes appearing amongst the weed beds. A few of the decent size mirrors appeared, and one of which was a heavily scaled mirror, which I really liked the look of, and I dropped a bait pretty close to where it was showing itself. Little small traps, that's all I was doing, just fishing with a handful of boilies and a little bit of pellet as well. And the first rod I dropped out in the morning, I just dropped it in pretty close in, and then I just left it and walked a little bit further up the bank. Started messing on my phone as you do as a carp angler, not really thinking too much was going to happen. I just wanted a chilled out day after the drive the day before, and I was messing around with my phone, and I couldn't believe it, because within a matter of minutes of me dropping that rod out, I was away again. So I got a third bite in less than 24 hours on a lake that only contains 18 fish. And you know, I was like, wow, I was almost like shocked, if I'm honest, because it was silly season. It is the time of the year when you do catch fish, and they are very easy to catch, but you've still got to get your tactics right. And straight away, as soon as I hit into the fish, I could see it was the heavily scaled mirror, which was around about low 30s, mid 30s, that sort of weight. And I had a really good scrap with it as well in the weed, and real good battle amongst the weed and under the tip. And then eventually I netted it, and you know, massive smiles, that's all I can say, because it really is a striking fish. It's only a small carp lengthwise, but it's a really deep fish. And Jack went on to tell me that this particular fish has been spawned in the lake. He's got a stock pond next to the lake, and then what he does is takes the spawn out of the lake, puts it in the stock pond, and when they get to a certain size, Jack then puts them back into the main lake. And you can go on his Facebook page and see the pictures of the big fully scaled when it's only about the size of his hand, and it's now weighing 33 pounds. I think it has weighed about 35 pounds, and I think last year it went, up until last year, it went about 18 months without capture, and then since then it's been caught a couple of times. And what a really striking fish it is. I couldn't believe it, because it's a really lovely carp, big golden scales on it, and in the morning sunshine it looked absolutely beautiful. So I'll take a look at that fish now. Now, if anybody out there asks me why I've driven all the way to Cornwall, I think that sums it up. Absolutely beautiful carp. What a creature. A really nice fish. It's got a little bit of ghosty in it as well. It's not a true proper carp, should we call it, but obviously with it being a fish that's born and bred in the lake, it's a real special fish, especially to Jack and a lot of the Cornish anglers who fish the lake on a regular basis. Now, with that out of the way, I was beaming. I didn't really need to catch anything else to make my trip, although I've got 6 days ahead of me, and you know, the conditions looked pretty good. It was favourable for me to get another bite over the next few days, and when I saw Jack that day, he came down and said, you know, you're doing really well. He couldn't believe that I caught a couple of fish in such a quick time, really, from having only arrived at the lake less than 24 hours before. Normally it's a little bit moody when you first arrive on the water, but with me being on the venue on my own and having fished these small waters a lot, I did learn a lot fishing places like Redmere and Spitfire Pool, you know, where the Wood Common is, really striking fish in England, which I went on to catch, which is now incidentally nearly 60 pounds. It's got a bit of a publicity ban on it, so Rich probably killed me for saying that, but that particular fish, everyone sort of puts it alongside the Burfield Common, but it's now getting to a weight which is almost bigger than the Burfield Common. So that one is definitely one to keep an eye on. But from fishing Spitfire Pool, you do see how moody carp can be on small waters, because they hide themselves away. It's almost like when you walk around, you don't see anything. And after catching that scaly mirror, it's fair to say that the lake went almost dead. I couldn't see any more carp, they'd all sort of hidden away. But during the afternoon, I did start to see 1 or 2 carp appearing at the other end of the lake, which again has got a little bit of a shallower area. I wouldn't call it the shallows, that's more towards where the deeper end is. The opposite end where the weed is more the shallow end. But there is a shallow bay where there's a few lily beds, a few lily pads and a bit of weed. And when the carp go in there, you do see them. And with me being really nice and quiet and creeping round and keeping things really covert, I dropped that rod in close, again with just a handful of boilies over the top. I was using bug boilies from DNA, and Jack allowed me to use my own pellet. He normally only allows you to use the house pellet on the lake, but on this occasion he allowed me to use the bug pellet from DNA Baits, and I just put a handful of bait around a handful of boilies, literally not too far away from where I'd seen these fish. And then it was as quick as that. About half an hour later, I was in again, an absolutely colossal fight with what appeared to be a nice sort of ghosty coloured, or a part ghosty, part normal carp. It wasn't a proper full ghost carp, this wasn't, but it was a really nice, heavily scaled fish again. And when I weighed it, it was just over 30 pounds. A really nice fish after a really colossal fight. There's the other side of it.
Lovely.
So that brings me to about tea time on my first full day, and I'd had 3 carp landed and 1 lost of an 18 stock of carp. So I was buzzing, I really was, and I did think at that point there's probably no chance of me getting any more bites. But you know what it's like in the springtime. It's that time of the year when the hardest to catch carp can be so easy. They start jumping up on the bank, and I thought sooner or later this lake's got to slow down, it can't keep going. And lo and behold, the next day, I didn't fish at night that night, I didn't put the rods out, I decided to keep things really discreet and keep everything as quiet as possible, not create any disturbance whatsoever, because let's be honest, I'd already disturbed the lake, and on a small water, I've already said that when you get on that lake, I know it sounds a bit of a strange thing to say, they know you're there. It doesn't matter what small lake you're at, as soon as you step on the banks, it's really going to set you back if you make any disturbance. I'd got myself a pair of these little lightweight shoes here, which are called Skechers, and if anybody's worn a pair of these, they're very supple, ideal for creeping around a small water like this. So definitely recommend it if you're going to go somewhere like this and have it to yourself, as I did. I'd been chatting to Jack about when you catch a couple of fish from this venue, it then tends to shut down and it needs a few days to reset itself. So that was at the back of my mind. So I thought, right, tonight I'm not going to put the rods out, I'm not going to fish. What I'll do is get up in the morning, wander around again and see if I can catch any fish, just dropping baits in front of them. A little bit different probably to how most people fish it, because it does tend to see that kind of static approach from what Jack was telling me. You get 2 guys on there, they set themselves up in those 2 main swims, bivvy up, they're chatting a lot, they're talking on the phones, making a bit of disturbance, and the carp obviously in a small water, they wise up to that. So I wanted to do a little bit different really, and I'd already seen from the first day that wandering around and dropping baits in front of the fish was working. So that morning I got up and it was a little bit different that day. It was slightly overcast, a little bit cooler. And from what I'd seen on the lake already was that around about midday, the fish started to migrate from the deeper water down to that shallow end. But this particular day, there was no signs of fish whatsoever. There was nothing in the margins, there was nothing in the shallows, the weed. The fish were really hiding themselves away. So I knew it was going to be a little bit tricky this day. And about midday-ish, I decided to stop walking around and put the static rods out and just sit back and see if anything was going to develop. And out of the blue, I ended up getting a bite. And it was a real shock because I did think the lake was in shutdown mode. And this particular fish, as soon as I hit into it, I picked it off from the only real main feature on the lake, underwater feature on the lake that is, where there's a kind of raised gravelly area, and Jack had already told me that's a really good spot there, especially for the bigger fish, and I picked it up from there. But as soon as I leant into the fish, the hook link parted and I lost the fish. So with me losing that fish and also not seeing a great deal and also making that disturbance right at the beginning of the session, I kind of thought, is this the time now to just have a couple of days away from the lake, maybe go and see a few sites, because there's lots of places around the local vicinity which are real touristy areas, lots of nice beaches. Newquay's not too far away, Padstow's not too far away. There's lots of areas in Cornwall to visit that I'd not been to for a while. So at the back of my mind I was thinking, shall I go and visit those places for a couple of days? But I couldn't get myself into that mode, if I'm honest, because somewhere in front of me in that small pond were 2 absolutely gigantic carp, which I kind of had a feeling I timed it right. The lake was being a little bit different according to Jack. It was producing the goods. The fish were being very obliging. So he kept telling me, if I was you, I wouldn't do your tourist stuff just yet, because I think you've got a good chance of getting a good one. It's that time of the year, and I've never seen the lake fishing so well, so early into a session. So with that, I thought, right, okay, I'll stick to my guns and I'll keep fishing it. But the rest of that day, nothing happened. It was a really quiet day, and I knew it was going to happen because that's what always happens on the small waters. And as I say, the weather was a little bit different as well. It wasn't as sunny, and when you fish somewhere like Spitfire Pool up in Norfolk, where the Wood Common is, Rich Wilby, who owns that lake, had always told me that those carp in there are solar powered. As soon as the sun comes out, you start to see the fish. And I'd kind of seen on the first 2 days of fishing on Spooky that that's really what the carp were like as well. When the sun came out, you started to see these big fish creeping into the weed beds, creeping into the margins and appearing. So with the next day due to be a little bit more sunny, a little bit more warmer as well, I thought maybe it might be a bit different. So didn't put the rods out again that night, kept things nice and quiet. As soon as the morning broke the next morning, and it really was a beautiful morning. The sun came up really early. It was a clear blue sky day, completely different to back home in Yorkshire where the missus kept texting me telling me it was raining. This was a really nice springtime morning, lovely morning, and I got some nice shots of the lake and the mist coming off the water, and it looked really, really nice, really inviting. And I kind of knew in the back of my head that if this stays like this for around about midday, I might see a few fish coming in close. So I gave it till midday before I put the rods out, went down to the shallow end of the lake, had a little walk round, started to see the odd fish appearing amongst the weed beds, but it was clear they was being a little bit cagey, a little bit shy than they were when I first got there. They knew that there was somebody fishing for them. They knew that somebody was on the prowl, even though I wasn't making a great deal of disturbance. And after a short while of just observing the fish, I could see that they were gathering more along one area of the bank, so I decided to get a couple of rods and a bucket of bait and go and have a wander, because one particular area of bank down the shallow end I started to see the fish appearing, and it looked like the ideal place to just drop a couple of rods in close, sit back and enjoy the afternoon. So I did that, and bit by bit I started to see one or two of the carp, the decent carp that is, appearing in front of me. The sun came out, it was nice and warm, and true to what I was saying earlier on about the solar poweredness of these carp, they were just like Spitfire pool fish. As soon as the sun came out, so did the carp, and they slowly started coming in close. Didn't look as easy to tempt as the first couple of days. They did look a little bit cagey, but I knew with a little bit of perseverance and keeping quiet, there was definitely a chance. And around about 5:30 in the evening, one of the rods was away, and I was into an absolutely colossal fight. And it really was a really long, hard fight on a really small pit. I ended up landing the fish at the opposite end of the lake. Now Jack had just done a little bit of pruning on the trees, or pollarding I think the word is, and luckily I could walk along the lake, and with a rod held high, a 13-foot elevate rod, I could keep the line just off the top of the trees, and I could keep going down the other end of the lake, because what was on the end of the line was a really long ghostie. So straight away I started thinking, is it one of the big two, you know, the two big 50-pounders? Now I knew that those two 50-pounders had been caught earlier in the year, and they were probably due another capture, because according to Jack, they're probably the easiest fish to catch in the lake, because they do tend to come out a couple of 3 times a year. And as soon as I saw this long orange flank in front of me, the old knees turned to jelly, and I was just hoping that the hook was going to hold, because this particular fish really did fight well, and they ended up having it on for about 15-20 minutes. When I eventually landed it, I could see, unfortunately, it wasn't one of the two main ones, but it was the third biggest fish in the lake at 38 pounds. And what an absolutely beautiful carp it was as well. A really striking, big, long, orange ghostie. I thought this one was one of the big two when I saw it. What a fight. It's the number 3 fish, 38 pounds. Mega, absolutely mega. That's the dog scratching in the background that you can hear. I think it was about 6 o'clock when I eventually got finished with that fish. I did the photography on my own and the filming on my own, and a short while later Jack appeared, and he didn't think that I was telling the truth when I turned around and said I'd had another bite, and it was the third biggest ghostie in the lake. He said he's never known the lake fish as well as it was at the moment. He said there's a really good chance that you're going to get a big fish, as in the two big ghosties, and you're kind of listening, but it's not going in, because you kind of doubt things. You kind of think, well, I've already had a session to remember, because going to Cornwall is so far from me from where I live. And if you ask my missus, I had kind of doubts about going down there, because I knew that both of the ghosties had already been out in the early part of the, or the latter part of the winter, early part of the spring, and the chances of rocking up and getting one on your first ever trip, I was kind of, you know, doubting myself, as you always do. You always have. I'm always positive as a person, but you do tend to, the older you get with your carp fishing, you do tend to see the same sort of patterns, and it's very rare that fish get caught again on lakes like this. So I was kind of not sure what was going to happen, but when he said there's a really good chance that you might get it in the next couple of days, I kind of put it to the back of my head, or went in one ear and out the other. But the next day, again, I didn't fish at night, rested the lake. The next day I got up and it was really devoid of fish. It was a really quiet looking lake. There was not a great deal on show. And one of the things that Jack had told me was that the two big uns tend to get caught more from one area of the lake. Now, this is only a pond of about an acre in size, maybe slightly less than that, probably no bigger than Spitfire Pool, sort of similar size to Ashley Pool, that kind of, you know, back garden pond type fishing. But even on a small water like that, the two big uns favoured the end towards the gate. It was a crucial piece of information, and from that point onwards, I decided I was just going to concentrate on trying to get one of those big fish, because I've still got a lot of my trip left. Jack normally only allows people down on the lake for 4 days at a time, then he rests it for 3 days. And with me coming down from Yorkshire and with him asking for me to do a film as well, he kind of agreed that it was okay for me to stay a week. So I still had 5 days of the trip left, which is a long time on a water like that. And you know, the first 2 days I'd made all that disturbance and got my bites out of the way. Third biggest fish in the lake at 38 pounds as well. Now's the time when I'm not really that bothered about getting a bite anymore. I want to get one of those two big uns. And with those two fish only tending to get caught 2 or 3 times a year, I knew they'd just been caught early part of spring, latter part of winter. Was they going to do another bite? There was every chance, especially with the way that the lake was fishing. So what I decided to do was just concentrate on one rod just in front of where I was set up, kind of 6 foot area amongst some pads where it slightly dropped off. I've been baiting that area anyway when I first got there. Jack had told me to trickle a bit of baiting all around the lake in different spots. And I decided to just put another rod out on the opposite bank, just around the corner, just past the outlet. And again, another 6 foot spot, which I knew that the number 2 fish in the lake also had quite recently been caught from. So, you know, I was happy to do that. I'd got plenty of time ahead of me. And I gave it till the evening, decided to reel in and not fish the night, and then repeat the process the next day. So lovely night's sleep again. Got up the next morning, really quiet, had a little walk round, didn't see any signs, got those 2 rods in position, and then just sat back and kept things as quiet as I possibly could. And with me only fishing just in front of the rod tips, you know, I was less than a rod length out. I was keeping the line nice and slack as well. I knew I'd got a good chance if those fish moved into that shallower area at that end of the lake. But honestly, did I expect it to happen? No, I didn't. My trip was already made, but around about 5 o'clock in the evening, I was just sitting there in the bivvy and there was no warning whatsoever. Out of the blue, the rod just in front of me absolutely ripped off. There was no warning bleep, no fish boshing. It was silent, and then it just roared off. And as soon as I hit into it, I knew it was a decent fish. The lead had come off. I saw it was one of the ghosties, and with me already landing the number 4 ghostie and the number 3 ghostie, it could only be one of the 2 main fish in the lake. And when I saw it roll the first time, I knew straight away it was one of the big uns. Now, of the 2 big uns, there's one really that I wanted to catch the most, because I've known about this fish for a long time, since the early days of Carp Talk. It's the one that really drew me to the lake originally, and it's the most longest standing lake record in there also. It's only in recent times that the other one's caught it up, but that's the fish known as the big girl. And Jack had already told me that if you hook into the big girl, you'll know about it, because it puts up an absolutely colossal fight. And that's basically what happened over the next 15-20 minutes or so, because I turned on the head cam and I got the footage of the fight from start to finish, and it was a really, really strong, lengthy battle where the fish went from where I hooked it almost down to the shallows and back again. It really was angry. It went into the deeps, it got stuck in a weed bed, it then came out, it then went charging up the margin down to my left, it then went charging along the margin to the right, it went through the pads to the right, it went through the weed to the right. There was many moments during the battle that I just hoped that it was going to stay on. It was just a tough, tough fight, nerve-wracking fight, especially when you're attached to a 50-pound carp in England, especially one in Cornwall on a really small water like that. So when I eventually got it in the net, I can't tell you how relieved I was, because I'd already had my trip made when I caught that 38-pounder, but to catch the big girl, because it was the one that I mostly wanted, in front of me, I saw it there, I was absolutely over the moon. I really was. An absolutely special fish. One of those moments that you sit there and you think, is it really true? This was my first trip to this lake, and I was only about 3.5, 4 days into the session, and I'd already caught a season's worth of fish out of this venue, because it normally does 24 bites in a season. Well, that's what it did last year, 24 bites, and I'd had 6 bites already in only 4 days, 4.5 days of fishing, which was just unbelievable. But there in front of me was the big girl, absolutely colossal fish. When you saw it across its shoulders, it was absolutely huge. Its last capture, it was 51.5 pounds, I think it was. And you know, that's one of the biggest ghost carp in England. I don't know what the biggest ghost carp is in England. It used to be a 60 pounder in one of the embryo waters. I don't know if that fish is still alive. I know there used to be a 50 pounder in Wellington Country Park as well. I'm not sure if that fish is still alive either, because it's a really old one. But this one was also a really old carp. Jack puts it as over 30 years old. It's got a lot of history. It's lived in quite a few different waters in the southwest. But there it was in my net, an absolutely colossal fish. And I was absolutely buzzing. I really was. A dream come true, and a really special carp as well. If you live in the north, you can all probably relate with this, because every now and again when you've got a massive journey to make, you think, I hope it's worth it. And all I can say on this occasion, it most definitely has been, because there is 52 pounds of Cornwall's biggest carp. Call it what you want, ghost carp, garden pond fish, I ain't really bothered what you say. That is an absolutely humongous carp in a really tricky lake, which only does about 20 bites a year. So am I over the moon? You bet I am. And I hope you enjoyed watching, because this has been a fantastic few days fishing at a lovely venue, which comes massively well recommended from me. Look at that thing. What a carp. That is awesome. Everything that carp fishing should be about. Happiness and memories. Width of his head, huge. Gonna get bigger and all that is. Absolutely awesome. Thank you very much for an amazing memory. You can probably tell from my face that I was on a proper high at that point. The Carper's high, as they call it, because it was the perfect ending to what had been an absolutely fantastic week. I'd loved it from start to finish, and at that point I didn't want to fish on. I did stay another night, didn't catch anything that night, and for the rest of the day all I decided to do was go and do the tourist stuff. Went down to Padstow, had a Cornish pasty, as you're always going to do when you go to Cornwall. Had a walk along the beach. I was buzzing, massive smile on my face, fantastic trip. Massive thank you to Jack for inviting me down there. It was a really, really special time, and certainly a week to remember for myself. And if you're interested in fishing at Spooky Pool, there are spaces available. I don't know whether you're going to get on, because it is a venue that is very limited with space. It's a very much sought after water in that area, but if you contact Jack through his Facebook page, he will get back to you. Don't ring him. He's already told me he hates phone calls. He likes to deal with people on messages and by email. So if you get through to the Spooky Pool and Oaks Facebook page, contact Jack that way. His name's Jack Basile, lovely guy, and he owns a special venue. So I hope you've enjoyed listening to me talking about it, and I hope you get the chance to go and fish it, because it really was a great week for me. Although on the way home I managed to smash my car, but I wasn't really that bothered. But anyway, I hope you like this video. Don't forget to like this video if you have liked it, and subscribe to the Avid channel for future films, and maybe I'll see you again real soon.